You ever get hooked on something that just feels, well, impossible?
Yeah.
Like it just bends the rules right there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Today, we're plunging into one of those real head scratchers.
hmm
Spoon bending.
It certainly has that air of the extraordinary, doesn't it? For a lot of people, it immediately brings up thoughts of psychic powers, maybe that whole 1970s thing with parapsychology.
Right. And Uri Geller. You have to mention Uri Geller.
Absolutely. Uri Geller is central to that
He
image.
was just everywhere back then, wasn't he?
hmm
Making forks and spoons warp on TV. It really made you wonder, maybe we all have some kind of hidden power.
hmm
And that line from The Matrix, you remember. The spoon does not bend because it is impossible. It bends because you realize the truth. There is no spoon.
Yes. Such a great line. It really taps into that mind over matter idea perfectly.
It does. But what if there's another way to look at it?
Well, that's sort of our mission today, isn't it? We want to explore this alternative idea that maybe spoon bending isn't supernatural, but actually shows something equally amazing, which is the often untapped power of our own physical bodies,
Yeah.
and that really deep connection between our minds and our physical selves.
Exactly. So we're going to kind of dissect this seemingly magical act. We'll be pulling in ideas from biomechanics, how our bodies actually move.
Right, and neuroscience, what the brain's doing.
Yeah, even some philosophy and the actual science of materials. What spoons are made of matters.
Definitely.
So get ready, because some of the stuff we've dug up, well, it might just change how you think about what humans are capable of.
Okay, so let's start by setting the scene a bit. The cultural landscape where spoon bending really took off as this, paranormal thing.
The 70s.
The 1970s, exactly. It was a time when people were, well, very open to exploring parapsychology, alternative ideas about reality.
Kirlian photography, ESP, all that stuff.
Right. That cultural climate, that openness, it created fertile ground for spoon bending to be seen as magical, almost before people even looked at the mechanics.
It really was a time for exploring the unknown, and Uri Geller was smack dab in the middle of it. Those TV appearances. Wow. The Johnny Carson one is legendary.
Unforgettable. He had millions of people trying it at home, convinced they might have the power too.
Yeah. But it wasn't just, like, for entertainment, was it? There's that weird Cold War angle, too.
That's a fascinating side note, actually. Yeah, during that period, there was some genuine, perhaps slightly misguided interest from certain quarters in whether psychic phenomena could have, strategic military uses.
Wild to think about. But this whole fascination with bending metal, it feels like it goes deeper than just the 70s, doesn't it? Like it taps into something older.
I think it does. You look at anthropology, Claude Levi-Strauss talked about how metalworking across many cultures has historically been linked with magic, transformation.
The blacksmith in the village, right?
Exactly. Often seen as someone with special, almost, mystical powers because they could shape this tough material.
Makes sense. And then you take something as mundane, as everyday as a spoon,
Yeah, something you eat your soup with.
and suddenly it's twisted out of shape. It feels like a violation, like you've crossed some kind of boundary.
Precisely. Culturally, the spoon is about, domesticity, order, civilized eating. Bending it feels like a transgression,
Yeah.
a display of control over the everyday world. Maybe even, like Baudrillard might say, it becomes a sort of hyperreal object, blurring that line between reality and our perception.
So you had this huge public fascination on one side.
Mm.
And then, inevitably, the skeptics started raising their hands.
Oh, absolutely. And quite rightly, you had magicians like James Randi who were very vocal critics.
Yeah, the amazing Randy.
He and others pointed out quite correctly that a lot of these demonstrations could be explained by classic magic techniques. Sleight of hand, misdirection,
Retraction.
even just powerfully suggesting to the audience that the spoon was bending when maybe it wasn't, or not as much as they thought.
Right. They talked about pre-weakening the metal, maybe using special alloys that bend easier.
Or just using the power of suggestion. It definitely brought a necessary dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
But, it often felt like a false dichotomy. Either it had to be a really psychic power or it had to be a deliberate magic trick.
Right. Like there was no other option.
But there's this interesting middle ground, isn't there? Something we saw with those party trick things that topped up.
Oh, yeah. Jack Hook's PK parties. What were those about?
Well, these were basically gatherings where, ordinary people, folks who are often pretty skeptical themselves, were guided through exercises to try and bend metal, spoons, keys, that sort of thing.
And did they?
Surprisingly, yeah, many of them did, or at least they felt they did. And they often described this genuine feeling of wonder, like their own possibilities had suddenly expanded, whatever the actual mechanism was.
That feeling of wonder seems really important here, doesn't it? Whether they thought it was psychic energy or just figuring out a new way to use their own strength. The experience itself felt real, felt significant to them.
Exactly. It brings up that interesting philosophical point, you know. How much is our idea of magic versus mundane shaped by our own subjective experience and the cultural stories we tell? The awe was definitely there.
So even if the explanation isn't paranormal, there's still something kind of extraordinary happening. A display of human potential maybe we just overlook.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that's what we should delve into now, right? Just how capable our physical bodies actually are.
Okay, yeah. Which brings us nicely to the frankly incredible capabilities of the human body itself. We sort of think of machines as powerful,
Mm-hmm.
but our own bodies can do some astonishing things, often accessing reserves we don't even realize we have.
It's amazing how much we underestimate ourselves, isn't it? Think about those documented cases of hysterical strength.
Oh, right, like the stories of mothers lifting cars off their children.
Exactly. There are verified instances where people in extreme emergencies have managed lifts or feats of strength far, far beyond their normal capacity. It suggests our everyday strength is maybe just a fraction of what's possible, like there are internal safety locks that can get bypassed.
Like that Tom Boyle Jr. story,
Right.
lifting part of a 3,000-pound Camaro off a cyclist. That's just mind-boggling.
It really is. It suggests these deep reservoirs of power that usually only surface in the most extreme situations.
Yeah.
But it's not just life or death stuff, is it? Look at elite strength athletes today.
Oh, man. Yeah, like Eddie Hall or Hafthor Bjornsson, deadlifting over 500 kilograms.
Incredible feats. Or Olympic weightlifting records, things that were considered utterly impossible not that long ago. They just keep pushing the boundaries of what we thought the human body could physically do.
And it's clearly not just about having bigger muscles, is it? The mental side seems absolutely crucial.
Oh, totally crucial. You listen to these top athletes, they often talk about getting into specific mental states.
Yeah.
Intense focus, a kind of altered consciousness
Yeah.
almost. There was a powerlifter, Anu Turchanin, who described doing a world record spot in what he called a trance state.
Wow. A trance state. That almost sounds, well, magical in itself, doesn't it? That level of focus.
Yeah.
It makes me think of martial arts breaking techniques. Breaking bricks or boards.
That's a great parallel.
Yeah.
Because it looks completely superhuman, right?
Yeah.
But when you break it down, it's actually based on really precise biomechanical principles, getting your body alignment just right.
Uh-huh.
Recruiting multiple muscle groups in perfect coordination, maximizing speed at the point of impact, and crucially, hitting the material at its weakest point.
But even knowing the physics, when you actually see someone shatter a stack of concrete blocks with their bare hand,
Yeah.
there's still that gasp, the feeling of awe.
Absolutely. For the person doing it and for anyone watching, there's this sense of witnessing something that just defies ordinary reality. Masters like Masutatsu Oyama, famous for his breaking power, talked about needing a state of mushin. Yeah, empty mind. Basically a state of pure, unwavering focus, no extraneous thoughts.
So this theme keeps coming back, mind and body working together to do these seemingly impossible things. And it's not just explosive power, right? Endurance, too, like those marathon monks or Wim Hof, the Iceman.
Excellent examples. They really highlight our ability to consciously influence things we normally think are totally involuntary, like body temperature or enduring extreme hardship.
Right. The marathon monks running insane distances for years.
Or Wim Hof consciously controlling his physiological responses to extreme cold. It shows this incredible mental discipline over the physical body.
Okay, so how does this all loop back to bending a spoon, which seems much less dramatic than lifting a car or sitting in ice?
Well, if we can learn to consciously influence our physiology in these really extreme ways, it strongly suggests we might also be able to develop much finer control over more subtle aspects of our physicality. Like fine motor skills, our sense of proprioception. That's your body's awareness of its position and movement. And the really precise application of force. All things that would be absolutely key to manipulating a piece of metal effectively.
It's like our bodies have this hidden flexibility, this sort of plasticity that can be shaped by our intention.
Exactly. Think about body modification traditions in different cultures. Yogic practices, some tantric disciplines, they demonstrate the body's amazing ability to be, well, reconfigured when guided by focused intent over time. The sociologist Marcel Mauss called these techniques of the body.
Techniques of the body, I like that.
These culturally specific ways we learn to use our bodies, expanding what they can do.
So maybe the magic of spoon bending isn't some external force after all, but it's actually giving us a glimpse into these broader, often hidden capacities that we all possess within our own embodiment.
I think that's exactly the perspective we're exploring. And this leads us into thinking about the philosophy of it all. It's not just the physical act. There's a whole subjective experience, a kind of phenomenology of physical effort involved.
Okay, phenomenology of physical effort. And unpack that a bit. What do you mean?
Well, interestingly, when you're engaged in really intense physical exertion, it can often trigger a kind of altered state of consciousness.
How so?
Think about it. Your sense of time might warp, right? Your focus becomes incredibly sharp, zeroed in on the task, and that link between your intention, what you want to do, and your body's action becomes really direct, almost seamless.
Like being completely in the zone. Nothing else matters.
Exactly. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty talked about motor intentionality, this almost preconscious way our bodies just engage with the world, and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow.
But yeah, flow state.
That feeling of complete immersion in a challenging activity, it fits perfectly here. Elite performers often describe this feeling of effortless action, of somehow going beyond their normal limits.
So applying that to spoon bending, the magic isn't necessarily the bent spoon itself, but maybe it's that intense focus, that altered state of being that allows someone to apply just the right force in just the right way.
Precisely. And Eastern philosophies offer another lens here, too. Think about concepts like ki or chi in martial arts.
Right, often presented as some kind of mystical energy.
Well, yes, sometimes. But many practitioners and philosophers like Yasu Yuasa explain it less supernaturally. They see it more as a tangible unification of mind and body, something cultivated through really dedicated long-term practice, an integrated state.
So it's not about just wishing the spoon to bend, but developing this really deep practice connection between your mental focus and your physical actions.
Exactly. And there's another concept from ancient Greece this time that seems relevant. Metis.
Perikitis.
Yeah, it's often translated as cunning intelligence or craftiness, but it's more than just being smart. Detienne and Vernant described it as this adaptable, embodied knowledge that comes from hands-on experience. Think of Odysseus.
Okay, the ultimate resourceful hero.
He wasn't always the strongest guy, but he had Metis. He knew how to use his wits, his environment, his own abilities, often in unexpected ways, to achieve his goals.
So a skilled metal bender might develop this kind of métis for metal, an intuitive feel for how it behaves, where the weak points are, how much pressure to apply.
Exactly. It's a form of knowledge that's literally in their hands, learned through doing, not necessarily something they could write down in a manual, which of course can make it seem mysterious to an outsider watching.
Yeah, that makes sense. Embodied knowledge.
And then layered on top of all that, you just have sheer willpower.
Right.
Nietzsche's idea of the will to power not as dominating others, but as this drive for self-overcoming, for mastering oneself by pushing against resistance. Bending metal is quite literally overcoming physical resistance.
It's like a physical manifestation of your intention making an impact on the world.
Perfectly put. And there's a contemporary philosopher, Sean Kelly, who talks about the gravity of things, that basic fundamental resistance the physical world presents to us. Overcoming that resistance through focused effort, like physically bending a piece of metal, becomes a kind of existential achievement. It demonstrates the power of human will when it's enacted through the body.
Okay, wow. So we've shifted the lens from the paranormal to this incredible interplay of body, mind, and will. But let's get down to the nuts and bolts, or maybe the spoons and forks. What's actually happening to the metal? What does science say?
Right, let's look at the material itself. Because while metal seems incredibly solid and unyielding, material science tells us it has specific properties we can work with.
Like what?
Well, things like elasticity, that's its ability to spring back to shape after being bent a little. Then there's plasticity, its ability to be permanently deformed once you push it past a certain point.
Okay.
That point is called the yield strength. Below that, it bends and springs back. Above that, it stays bent. Then you have fatigue metal getting weaker from repeated stress, even if that stress is below the yield strength. And also work hardening, where bending the metal actually makes the bent part harder, but potentially more brittle.
So the key takeaway is that metal isn't just this solid block. It has vulnerabilities, points where it can give.
Exactly. It has predictable behaviors that skilled individuals can learn to exploit, often intuitively, using applied physics.
And you mentioned yield strength. How does that compare to, say, how strong our grip is?
That's a crucial point. Common utensils, like stainless steel spoons, often have a yield strength that is actually higher than the force most people can generate with a simple grip.
Ah, okay, so you can't just squeeze it and bend it easily.
Generally, no. A typical yield strength for stainless steel flatware might be, say, 200 to 350 megapascals. That's a measure of pressure. But average human grip strength is maybe more in the 50 to 70 MPa range.
So there's a gap. How do people bridge that gap then?
Leverage and technique. It's not about superhuman grip strength. It's about applying the force you do have in a really smart way.
Right, like using the spoon handle as a lever.
Precisely. Plus, using twisting motions torsion, which can concentrate stress effectively, and exploiting that metal fatigue we mentioned.
How does fatigue work again?
If you repeatedly bend the metal back and forth, even slightly, in the same spot, you introduce tiny microscopic cracks. These grow with each cycle, weakening the metal's internal structure until eventually it requires much less force to bend permanently or even break. It's like the metal gets tired.
Okay, so you're sort of wearing it down strategically.
In a sense, yes. And this understanding of the metal's properties, for someone who does this regularly, it might not be conscious scientific knowledge, but it becomes this intuitive, tactile feel for how the material responds under their hands.
And our hands themselves, the biomechanics of how we use them, must be important too.
Oh, hugely important. Our hands are incredibly complex and sophisticated biomechanical tools. You mentioned leverage using the spoon itself. Even though it's technically a third-class lever, which isn't the most efficient type, it still provides some mechanical advantage.
Yeah.
Then there's how we generate force. It's not just finger muscles. We use multi-joint force summation coordinating muscles all the way up the arm, even into the shoulder and torso, to deliver force smoothly and powerfully through the hands.
So your whole upper body can get involved in this seemingly small action.
Exactly. And don't forget proprioception. We have something like 17,000 mechanoreceptors, sensors in each hand. They give us incredibly detailed feedback about pressure, texture, vibration, the angle of our joints.
Wow, 17,000.
Yeah. It allows us to feel precisely how the metal is resisting, where it might be starting to give, and to adjust our grip and force application literally in milliseconds. It's this constant, fine-tuned feedback loop.
It's like that difference between knowing about physics and your body knowing how to apply it.
Precisely. That's the philosopher Gilbert Ryle's distinction between knowing that and knowing how. This is pure embodied intelligence, the body knowing how.
What about heat? Does the warmth from your hands make a difference? I feel like I've heard that.
Interestingly, yes, it potentially can, especially with certain metals or alloys. Maybe more so with things like aluminum than stainless steel. Well, our hands transfer heat to the metal. Even a relatively small temperature increase can slightly lower the yield strength of some metals. We're not talking huge amounts. Maybe a 50 degrees Celsius rise could reduce yield strength by perhaps 10% in some aluminum alloys, for example.
Okay, so not dramatic, but maybe enough to help at a critical point.
Possibly. Also, if you heat the metal unevenly, say, gripping it tightly in one spot, you can create internal stresses within the material, which might make it slightly easier to bend at those points.
So someone skilled might be intuitively using their body heat, maybe by holding it for a while, to create these subtle advantages without even thinking about it consciously.
It's quite plausible. It could be part of that developmentis we talked about, and we do have some studies that looked at people who learned to do this.
Like that University of Sheffield study.
Exactly. They found that successful benders weren't using any detectable mystery energy, but were very good at strategic leverage, exploiting work hardening and fatigue through specific movements, and using that constant tactile feedback. And even back at Jack Hook's PK parties, observers noted patterns. People often warmed up the metal first, they applied force gradually but with intense focus, and sometimes seemed almost dissociated, really concentrating.
And the fact that regular people with practice could learn it, that seems really key. It wasn't some innate magical gift.
Absolutely. There have been longitudinal studies showing it's a learnable skill. People develop that proprioceptive sensitivity. They refine their force application techniques. They get familiar with how different metals feel and respond. So the magic, again, seems to lie in that really sophisticated, often unconscious integration of perception, know-how, and technique.
Okay, so it's not just about the physical act itself, the muscles and the metal. It's deeply tied into our brains, isn't it? right? How our brains control and adapt everything.
Precisely. The neurological side of expressing strength is way more complex than just how big your muscles are. It involves really intricate things happening in your nervous system.
Like what sort of things?
Well, there's motor unit recruitment. That's basically how many individual muscle fibers your brain tells to switch on for a given task. Then there's rate coding, how fast those nerve signals are firing, and intermuscular coordination, making sure different muscles work together smoothly. And even how your brain maps out your body parts.
And it sounds like most of us are like operating way below maximum capacity on that front.
Generally, yes. There's something called Henneman's size principle, which basically says our brain usually recruits smaller, more fatigue-resistant motor units first and only brings in the big, powerful ones when really high force is needed. It's efficient, but it means we rarely, if ever, activate all our available muscle fibers simultaneously.
Like a built-in safety governor.
Kinda, yeah. Maybe to prevent us from tearing muscles or tendons. Untrained people might only access, say, 60 to 80% of their potential motor units, but elite athletes, through training, learn to recruit much more effectively, getting closer to that theoretical maximum.
Which explains why you can get stronger through training, even before your muscles physically get much bigger. That neural adaptation thing.
Exactly. Your brain just gets better, more efficient at using the muscle tissue you already have. And this ties into neuroplasticity.
The brain changing itself.
Right, the brain's amazing ability to reorganize, form new connections based on experience. When you practice a fine motor skill, like the very specific grip and pressure needed for metal bending, the areas of your brain dedicated to controlling those hand and finger movements actually expand and become more refined.
Like how a musician's brain adapts for their instrument.
Perfect analogy. The brain literally remaps itself to support the skill.
So practicing spoon bending is physically changing your brain to make you better at it.
Absolutely. You develop enhanced sensor-motor integration, that seamless coordination between the sensory feedback from your hands, how the metal feels, its resistance, and the motor commands going out to your muscles. And if you practice enough, the skill becomes overlearned. It shifts from needing conscious cortical control to running more automatically via subcortical pathways.
Making it seem effortless.
Exactly. That's why experts in any domain, sports, music, crafts, can perform incredibly complex actions with what looks like total ease. Their brains have become highly optimized for that specific task.
So the perceived magic of someone easily bending a spoon, especially after years of practice, is really a sign of incredible neural efficiency that they've cultivated.
Beautifully put, yes. And it's not just long-term training. Even your immediate mental state can boost strength output, right?
You mean like psyching up?
Yeah. Using mental imagery, self-talk, maybe listening to intense music, strategies athletes use to increase force production without any immediate change in the muscle itself. It's purely a neurological effect.
And then you have the extreme end, that hysterical strength in emergencies again, where adrenaline and intense fear or determination seem to just blow past all the normal neurological limits.
Right. These extreme cases strongly suggest that our usual neurological governors on strength aren't fixed. They can be influenced significantly, both by long-term brain rewiring through practice and by temporary, powerful psychological states that bypass our normal self-protection mechanisms.
Wow. Okay. So pulling this all together,
Yeah.
it really feels like what we often see as this almost magical, paranormal act of spoon bending is actually this incredibly fascinating convergence
As convergence of what?
of highly honed physical skill, intense mental focus, maybe an intuitive, embodied understanding of material science, and just the amazing adaptability of our own nervous system, our own bodies and brains working together.
I think that sums it up perfectly. Understanding the biomechanics, the material science, the philosophical angles on effort and intention, the neuroscience. It doesn't take away the wonder, does it?
No, not at all. If anything, it makes it more amazing.
Right. It deepens the appreciation for just how remarkable human beings can be.
The real magic, then, isn't some weird external energy, but it's this incredible potential locked inside us, the power that emerges when mind, body, intention, and skill all come together just right.
Exactly. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about other things people can do that seem impossible.
Yeah.
What other hidden forces, what other kinds of untapped potential physical, mental, neurological might be operating just beneath the surface of what we currently understand? What other maybe magical abilities might just be lying dormant within us, waiting for us to figure out how to discover them, how to cultivate them, and maybe, bend them to our will?